Hey guys, Fox here. And today, like I said, we're going to be talking about a major milestone the USFL has just hit in regards to players signing to the NFL. In fact, there have been over 50 players to sign with NFL teams. If not mistaken, the number as I'm recording this is 51, which is naturally probably going to go up very fast due to, preseason training camp injury type things. So, I kind of just want to talk about what this actually means. This is a lot of impact in a lot of different things for the USFL in regards to itself, to the XFL competition, and to NFL things. So, the first thing to really note is the fact that there has now been a team signed, or a player signed to, I believe it's like 28 teams, 28 teams, with only a few having not been signed. I believe it's like the Bills, the Falcons, and a couple other teams, but 28 teams have signed players, with the biggest thing being that some of these teams have signed multiple. The Commanders, the Packers, and the Saints have all signed like 4+ guys pretty much. So some of these teams are really banking on some USL talent to potentially make the roster. But as for back to the main point of the 50 players being signed, well, I guess we'll talk about it. In terms of from the USFL, unsurprisingly, the two teams in the title game actually had the most at 8 in the Stallions and Stars. What may be surprising is that the Panthers and Maulers have actually had a lot. Now, the Maulers is kind of surprising to me, as I didn't see anyone who made it a huge deal, but, it's cool to see that. Panthers, I can get because their defense is so great and the receivers are really solid. The Gamblers have pretty much been mainly defensive guys, which makes sense. The Generals have signed some, and then the Bandits and Breakers both have signed the least. I do think that with all these injuries and stuff, we could see it as some big names like, Darius Victor, Mark Thompson, they haven't signed. I mean, Chris Odom only signed recently. So some of these top-end USFL talent is still there to maybe sign somewhere, but we'll see. As for the fact of there being 50 NFL signings from the USFL, the big thing is, what does this mean in regards to the competition, to the quality of players and stuff like that? So, just kind of, a talking video we're going to do. So, the first thing I want to say is that I don't think that these 50 signings is as big a deal as some people would make it out to be. My reasoning is most of these players could have already made an NFL roster, 90-man roster, if they, just tried out and stuff like that. So I don't think that them necessarily signing is the big deal. I think the big deals are going to see how many make the actual 53-man roster. If we have like 20 guys make that roster or those rosters, that becomes a big deal. But as for the practice squad things and the training camps, until we see them make the final rosters, I don't think it's as big a deal as people would make it out to be. Except that it is definitely a benefit to have them make these rosters, as some of these guys were, undrafted free agents that didn't sign anywhere or came right out of college to go to the USFL, things like that. And the big thing to note is how the USFL contracts are worked. The USFL is very smart in this, as they have secured the advantage in talent over the XFL, and that's unarguable. And it's due to the fact that their contracts are basically these 1 year with the second-year option, which the option is from the USFL. And I think the clause, something like that, is if the player is signed a 1-year contract with the NFL, and then it goes up, their contract is automatically back with the USFL. So let's just say, for sake of argument, that Channing Stribling makes the Commanders roster, plays in a few games, and they say they don't want to re-sign him or they cut him. He's still technically the USFL's, he's signed to the USFL. So in that regard, the players that do sign to the NFL and get this experience can get better at their game, which those who don't stay in the NFL and go back to USFL make the USFL product better itself, which naturally is a benefit in its war against the XFL, whether or not you're going to merge, something like that. The idea is that they're competing, and for the USFL's sake, having these players be able to get this extra year in is an advantage to make them better, especially since the USFL, even though not many people are keeping up totally, the USFL is still making signings. Like, different teams are still signing players and things like that. It's not like they're just not doing anything. So these guys that do eventually come back, mixed with the players that are already signing the USFL now rather than the XFL, you'll have the best players available for the USFL, which will be a huge advantage over the XFL. And as regards to players making the roster, the big deal of why I think if you have 20 guys make it is a big deal. If you have 20 guys make the actual rosters, it makes some of those other top of the line, practice squad guys think that showing your talent to pro scouts and stuff like that through the USFL can be a huge advantage. So those guys that were like who got more roster time, active roster time than some of the USFL players, see that the USFL players getting more active roster times than them. They go to the USFL, and it helps build that, just their like mystique, I guess, and things like that. And overall, that's probably the biggest advantage that the USFL can get. By having these signings and all these things, especially with how well they're keeping up with all these signings through their Twitter and like stuff like that, it makes it very easy for people to see who gets signed where, how many get signed, and is a very big deal. As I think that getting these players to, and just getting overall talent that's available to the XFL and USFL, when you have the USFL showing these guys making it in a much easier way, and if you do have some truly make it, makes the talent prefer the USFL than the XFL, considering the fact that, even though the XFL is paying more, it's not by a ton. It's by a decent amount, but if I remember correctly, it's only by a couple thousand. But the big deal is that the USFL could easily up their contracts themselves since, they actually made it a full year. And so it was something that pretty much no other spring league has done, is make it through a full year in a long time. So the fact they did it is a very big deal, and overall it really helps them because of these 50 signings. It just, showcases, hey, there are quality players here. Now, how quality, we'll see. There's been a couple decent performances. I know Marcus Gates had a really solid game for the Bears. Then there were a couple other guys who made some impact. But naturally, we have to wait a couple more weeks to see how many of the guys make the active rosters on teams and how many of them become players who, actually usually play in games, and then who become starters. We're going to have to wait and see, but, with a lot of other injuries happening, things like that, it's, going to help out a lot. Like for Cavante Turpin's sake, the Cowboys now have 2 receivers in front of them who aren't going to be there for opening week. So a lot of benefit could happen. We'll see. This has been ZomFox. If you enjoy this content, we might notify as soon as I upload any videos. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell, and as always, have a great night.